All right, it is showtime. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Happy, gosh, what day is it? Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Tuesday here. Is it still Tuesday there?
Yeah, just about. It's 10 o'clock at night. So, yeah.
We got a couple hours yet. Welcome, everyone. My name is Ruby. I am the director of the Feed Real Institute. Today, we've got a special guest, David Hartigan of Hemp Heroes. Welcome, David. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me on, Ruby. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we're excited. I love meeting new partners to the summit and learning about, fairly new products. I know you guys have been around for a while, but for those of you who haven't met David before, he is the founder of Hemp Heroes, Ireland's #1 selling hemp brand for pets, and Mushed & Co. And you've got over 40 wellness products made in Ireland and now selling in the US. David's companies are among the few B Corp-certified hemp brands worldwide. Wow, congratulations, B
Yeah, thanks so much.
Corp-certified.
Yeah, so I've been telling people for the last year we're one of 15 hemp companies in the world that have B Corp certification. But I was actually incorrect. We're actually one of 8 companies, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so less than 10.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, before we dive into your products and offerings, I'd love for you to share a little bit about what that means. What does B Corp-certified mean?
Yeah, so B Corp is, I suppose, a global recognition, and a lot of people have probably seen it on products and didn't really know what it is. So it's this kind of B logo. So some of the brands who'd have B Corp would be like, you're talking multi-billion-dollar companies like Ben and Jerry's, Evian Water, Innocent Smoothies. So some really big companies. And essentially what B Corp is, in a nutshell, it's, I suppose, the highest recognition for sustainability. So the kind of analogy I usually give people, it's kind of like an Olympic gold medal in sustainability is the best way kind of to look at it. So in order to get B Corp certified, it's actually quite a lengthy and difficult process. So I know some other kind of organizations, you pay them some money and essentially you get this lovely cert and you can put this logo on your product. And B Corp is very different. So it's actually merit based. And for us to get B Corp certified, it actually took us nearly over a year to get fully certified. And they look at your whole business. So it's not just how you make your products, it's how you source them, what energy you use, what water, what you do with your waste, how you treat your staff, what your corporate policies are, and then even what you do for the environment and I suppose your community. So it gives that full kind of 360 picture of how you run your business. So yeah, it's an incredible recognition to have, and it's very much kind of the starting point. So the idea is over time you get more sustainable. It's not kind of the finish line.
Sure. So is that something that you have to renew regularly?
Yeah, so recertification at the moment works every 3 years. So that's how you recertify. So again, we got certified in 2024. So we actually start the process for recertification next year to make sure, because it takes about 6 months to get everything in order. And again, they look at the whole business, what we've done since. So we've actually moved to a bigger production facility in Ireland. And the goal there is actually install solar panels. So we'll actually be using solar for most of our energy.
That's awesome. And I think, for hemp brands, being one of 8 is, a huge feat, but I'd say generally speaking in our pet industry, we
Yeah.
don't see a whole lot of companies going for that. And I don't think for lack of want, to have sustainable practices, but because it's a pretty rigorous process to go through. Would you say it was also monetarily, a financial burden to have to go through that?
Yeah, definitely. There is a financial cost involved, and usually it's that plus some of the initiatives you'll have to put in place in order to even qualify for B Corp certification. We were probably lucky in a sense in foundationally we've actually set ourselves up in a very sustainable way. So the way we manufacture our products, they're all cold pressed. We use no chemicals whatsoever in our production. And also in Europe, we use certified organic hemp. So we're actually EU certified organic. And then we've actually moved some of our packaging away from recyclable plastic to actually paper, which is compostable, which is pretty unique.
Wow, that is fantastic. And there was something that you mentioned earlier about some of the questions they asked, one of them being, what do you do with your waste? What do you do with it?
Yeah. Yeah. So we've actually a really cool process where we upcycle essentially our hemp cake. So we can get into it, but the way we manufacture our products is like completely different to everyone else, the way it's done in the US. So when it comes to CBD, I suppose all CBD comes from hemp. So hemp is a big, tall, dark green plant. And in order to get the cannabinoids out of the hemp plant, usually it goes through either a CO2 extraction or ethanol. And so we actually don't do either. The way we manufacture is we use a cold press method. So it's all high pressure and low heat. So after we actually make our cold press CBD, we have like a hemp cake material that's kind of a byproduct. So we actually upcycle that into our treats, which essentially
Mm,
means we run a zero waste system.
fantastic. That's huge.
Yeah,
That's really amazing. Congratulations.
thanks so much.
Yeah, so you mentioned cold press, and I think, for those of you guys that aren't familiar with Hemp Heroes, um, and probably because you're an Ireland company and most of our network is here, US, especially for our upcoming summit, you're going to have a lot of attendees meeting you from Southern California and all parts of America, and you're flying all the way here from Ireland to meet us. Can you sort of just take a step back and talk to us about cold press CBD and I guess the other types that are on the market? Because I really think that's not familiar to a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose I got into the industry back in 2017, and probably given a bit of backstory, I'll probably kind of explain why we do things. But my background is actually business consultancy. So I worked for Price Waterhouse for about 6.5 years. And that's actually what my master's degree is in. It's consulting. So I was never really in the pet industry. I've had a dog a long time and I've always been a lover of pets, but I never probably seen myself in this industry. But what happened in 2017 was I had a couple of friends who are professional athletes and I actually got them sponsored by CBD companies. So they were using it more for recovery and for sleep. And when I got the products, I was actually very disappointed in the quality. So when we got them, I mean, the branding was terrible, the packaging, the overall quality, and even how to use the product was so complicated. And I couldn't really wrap my head around why it was so difficult. So I kind of, I suppose, dipped my toe in and kind of started to learn a bit more around hemp and CBD. And then seeing that as there was a real opportunity there to bring something higher, I suppose, quality to the market. So
Mm-hmm.
using the money I actually had saved for a new car, I put that into launching Hemp Heroes. So that was November of 2018. So yeah, fast forward 7 years later, and we manufacture products from seed to shelf. And now we've over 40 different products.
Were you also using CBD yourself for recovery or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was using it more for, I suppose, sleep and stress and recovery to a degree.
Mhm.
So for the first 4 years of starting the business, I actually continued to work a full-time job while building the company, which essentially double jobbing and working in Big Four consulting is very difficult to do. It's not something I would recommend, but the only way I was able to do it was because when I slept really well, and my deep sleep was always on point because of the CBD. So
Mm.
like without a shadow of doubt, I wouldn't have been able to do it without taking CBD, just for stress levels and sleep. But we went from being essentially a white label, private label product at the start, where we had 3 products which actually weren't manufactured by us; they were manufactured by a third party, and then we brought the manufacturing in house essentially.
Did you have concerns about the quality when you were manufacturing with the third party, or why bring in house?
Yeah, so kind of 2 reasons. We were happy enough with the quality, but we knew we could do better. And second, we always knew we were going to have a long-term play in the game. We needed to be manufacturing because as much as a third party manufacturer can be really good and you can have good relationships, you really don't know what's in your product at the end of the day. And like in the US, over 90% of CBD products are essentially white label, private label. So it's more likely the brand you pick up on shelf doesn't manufacture their products than they do.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think we see that. We actually see that quite often, even with pet food or pet treats, generally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you guys aren't familiar, I'm trying to look for a bag here, which I don't have handy. Every brand is required to put, at least in the US, the FDA labeling requirements are required to put where the product is made, and it will say manufactured and or distributed by with different addresses. And so
Yeah.
very often, if those addresses vary from the actual brand's address, then they're not the ones making the product.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So you were helping your buddies who were taking CBD for people. And then how did we focus on pet wellness? Like how do we get there?
Yeah, so one of my friends, John, he had a dog who had severe arthritis, and John's dog was actually recommended tramadol from his vet. So now, speaking to a lot of vets, tramadol is actually very ineffective for most dogs and has a very low success rate. So when he tried tramadol and it didn't work, his vet kind of said, look, there's probably not much else we can do. You might have to consider possibly putting him down if he's going to be in continuous pain. So at that time, we'd actually just started the company, and John had tried him on CBD and it worked so well. John actually got an extra 2 years out of Alfie, which was obviously a huge success. So when we seen that firsthand and then other people's experiences with their pets, we kind of seen that there was a real value here for pets. And one of the cool things, I suppose, about pets using CBD is there is no placebo effect. It either works or it doesn't. And when you get a really good quality product and it works, you can really see that difference.
So have you had experience with pets where it doesn't work? What does that look like?
To be honest, no. The only kind of experience I've had where pet owners have found it's not worked is when they actually get low quality products. And unfortunately, that is an issue because even in Europe, probably around 90% of CBD products, again, are white label, private label. And I suppose there was such an, I suppose, explosion of CBD in the market. And that reason was the barriers to actually get a brand started were still really low, and technically are quite low today. That there's big manufacturers out there where if you a couple of $1,000, you can go to them, they'll make you a run-of-the-mill product and slap your label on it, and now you've got a product, but like the quality is going to be on the lowest end, where that's usually when I've spoke to customers in the past and they've said, look, I tried CBD and it didn't work. And like, I'll go through it now in a minute, but usually my first question to them is, okay, what product was it used? Okay, I used a CBD tincture. Okay, was your product yellow or clear in color in terms of the oil? And usually they go, oh yeah, it was clear like water. And then I go, okay, right, well, that's not a good sign. And then they're like, okay, why not? And then when I explain it to them, they're like, okay, that makes perfect sense.
Explain it to us. And I don't know that anyone's ever asked me if my CBD was yellow or clear. So if say it is clear, what does that mean?
Yeah, so if you think about it logically, all CBD, as we mentioned, is made from hemp. So hemp is like a 6-7 foot tall plant, and it looks quite similar to actual marijuana. So they're essentially cousin plants, and hemp is obviously dark in color. So you would expect an oil coming from that plant to be kind of that dark green color. So usually if it's clear in color, it's probably a sign that it's a CBD isolate. So what a lot of people don't know is there's actually 3 different types of CBD. So you've CBD isolate, you've broad spectrum, and then you've full spectrum. So the best way to look at it is CBD isolate is your lowest quality. And what CBD isolate means, it means isolated CBD. So you see in the hemp plant, you've literally over 100 different types of compounds and cannabinoids. And you want to try to get as many of them as possible in your product, because that creates this synergy effect, which in the CBD space is known as the entourage effect. So it's this kind of 2 + 2 = 6 effect. So with a CBD isolate product, all of them compounds, your vitamins, your minerals, your terpenes, they've actually stripped all of them away, and they've left you with just one compound, which is just CBD.
So why are companies doing that? I mean, how is CBD isolate made? Like what makes that the cheaper, I'm going to assume, cheaper process for them to isolate the CBD from the entire plant?
Exactly. So a CBD isolate usually looks like a white fine powder, and essentially it's really easy to manufacture with, because a kilo of CBD isolate was probably in around $2,000 back maybe 4 years ago. Now, because there's been such a growth in the industry, the price of CBD isolate has completely fell through the floor. So you'll buy a kilo of CBD isolate for around $500. So because it's so concentrated, it means you can make products very cheap. So for example, 1 gram of the powder of CBD isolate makes a 1,000 milligram tincture. So if you're getting that at $500 a kilo, it means your 1 gram is costing you about $0.50. And some brands will put that into essentially a glass bottle, and they mix it with a carrier oil, whether it be hemp seed oil, salmon oil, MCT oil, and then they'll sell that 1,000 milligram tincture for $40, $50, even $80, and it's costing probably about $2 to make.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you always need a carrier oil, whether it's isolate or broad or full spectrum?
Yeah, in general you do, because if you were just selling them the powder, it'd be far too concentrated. So you would be mixing it with some sort of a carrier oil to help the absorption, especially if you're using tinctures, where if you're using, say, CBD isolate with some topicals, again, you'd be mixing it with some sort of a carrier oil, or like if you're mixing it into a balm, and it would be mixed with other ingredients. So that one is essentially your lowest quality. And like I have one here I can show you. So you'll see here, it's really clear in color. Like it's pretty much translucent. So if you get a product and it's like this kind of a color and it's clear like water, that's a really bad sign. And unfortunately, customers are, I suppose, aren't educated on it enough that they actually don't know. And like when we were over at Global Pet in Florida earlier this year, we had someone come to our booth, and when we explained it to them, it should be dark. They actually told us the complete opposite and said they were at another booth 2 minutes ago, and the booth told them the clearer the color of the oil, the better the quality. So again, there's so much misinformation, but like naturally, if it's a dark green plant, you'd expect a darker color oil, which makes logical sense.
How do you combat that misinformation? I mean, it's especially going to something huge like global, where it's like that's B2B professionals talking to other professionals, where you sort of kind of expect that, deceptive marketing when you're talking to the customer and user. But how do you sort of work around that and say, no, it shouldn't be clear, like it should be darker in color? Are you like offering studies, or what does that conversation look like?
Yeah, so usually it's kind of just simple conversation and talking to them and explaining where CBD comes from. And then they go, yeah, something definitely sounded off when they said it should be clear. Like I'd expect it to be darker in color. So the more you kind of talk to customers, the more they realize that they're probably being fed a load of crap. And like their common sense here says it probably should be dark. So that's kind of your lowest quality. And usually 9 times out of 10, when a customer says, hey, I tried CBD before, whether it's for themselves or for their dog, and seeing next to no effect, it's probably because you got a really low quality product and someone made that for $1-2, and then essentially they're already looking for their next customer because they don't expect you back. So that's kind of your lowest quality. Your next kind of quality would be your broad spectrum. Now, broad spectrum means it has a broad spectrum of cannabinoids. So it's definitely a much bigger step up. But usually with a broad spectrum, what they've done is they've removed the trace of THC. So THC is essentially the cannabinoid that caused that intoxicating effect. And some pet owners, unfortunately, are kind of, again, miseducated that they think THC is like really, really dangerous for their pets. And like any amount of it's going to be toxic and their dog could potentially have a fatal reaction. Where in general, THC in small quantities is actually quite safe. And especially in the likes of a full spectrum product, it's still at such a low level, it won't actually cause any negative impact. So like to put it in perspective, the THC in hemp is between probably about 0.3%, and the THC in actual marijuana can be like 20 to 30%. So you're talking it's about 100 to 150 times in the difference. And it's a huge difference. So like the way I kind of give it to people is think of CBD as like non-alcoholic beer, and then I suppose marijuana is like a bottle of gin, essentially. So like they're completely polar opposites. But you see, when you make a broad spectrum CBD, in order to remove the THC, usually they do a thing called short path distillation, which is essentially boiling the product till the THC burns off, and then you're left with the remainder. Now, the issue with that naturally is if you're putting everything under such intense heat, it's going to convert certain cannabinoids and also damage some of them. So it's usually not as effective as a full spectrum for that reason, because it has had essentially a kind of a chemical process.
Right. So how do you like cold press the CBD?
Yeah.
Like that's, I think, for a lot of people unheard of.
Yeah. So just to show you, this is what kind of a CBD broad spectrum usually looks like. So it's more of a yellowy color. So it's kind of like an olive oily color. And generally speaking, that's how you can kind of at an eye level. Now, again, you would have to probably test the product in a lab to confirm, but usually it's that kind of yellowy color. So with ours, we kind of took a completely different approach. And when we looked at different extraction methods, cold pressing was very unique and no one was really doing it. And probably for a couple of reasons. One, it's very difficult to do. And secondly, it's actually very costly because with the likes of CO2 and ethanol, it's built for scale. So you can do huge, huge volumes really quickly. Where with cold pressing, it takes a little bit more time, but it's a much higher quality. So essentially the way our process works is it's high pressure and low heat. So for a better word, we essentially crush the hemp plant and that produces our oil. Now, the benefit of that is we've removed any chemicals whatsoever. So there's no CO2, there's no ethanol in our process. And because, for example, if you're using ethanol, that has to be re-extracted. And again, that means you're going through another process, usually of heating, which is going to obviously affect the end result. So because we've no extreme heats or I suppose cold temperature, and we've no chemicals, it means our actual finished product is in its natural form. So the really cool thing about our products is we have a very nice mix of CBD and then CBDA. So CBDA is the precursor to CBD. And you'll see actually a lot of products in the US now adding in CBDA isolate into their products to make them more effective. So the difference with us is we actually naturally have it there already. So what other brands are trying to essentially recreate, we already have in its natural form. And we have probably about a 50-50 kind of 60-40 split between CBD and CBDA.
That's awesome. So what I'm imagining, I would love to tour your facility at some point if I can make it over to Ireland. And you have another one as well,
in the US, yeah.
Right? Wonderful. Yeah. So what I'm imagining is, quite literally pressing down, some sort of machinery pressing down to sort of squeeze out or extract the oil. And so what you said earlier, and part of being a certified B Corp, is you're essentially taking those fibers, the waste of what's extracted, and turning those into treats.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So when we cold press, our end result, our cold press CBD, it has a full range of cannabinoids. So we'd have CBD, CBDA, like CBG, CBN. We'd have traces of THC and even THCA. So you have kind of this wide range of kind of your major cannabinoids and your minors. You've also your terpenes in there. So terpenes in their own right are really beneficial, and they're kind of what give plants their smells. So like if you ever smelled kind of like a lemon or a citrus fruit, that's it's called laminine. It's like one of the terpenes in lemons. So all of these terpenes have their own therapeutic benefits. And you see, usually with chemical extraction, they get damaged because there's a lot of processing, where with ours, we actually lock them in. So you're getting all of these natural compounds in their natural form. And it means the absorption is so much better. So like, for example, with ours, you'll see here, and what makes our products really unique is the color. So like, you'll see how dark that is. It literally looks like engine oil. And again, like logically, if you put spinach in a blender and it came out yellow or clear, you'd chuck it in the bin. So you would expect it to come out really dark. And that's the way our products are. So initially, people kind of took a while to wrap their head around it. But when you explain it to them in logical terms, they're like, okay, that actually makes way more sense than the yellow stuff I've been buying. Because why would it be yellow when it should be dark or it should be green?
Right. I have some personal familiarity with not applying high heat to food, because as you mentioned, you're essentially damaging the cellular structure of a plant or protein or whatever it is that you're what you're working with. How does, if at all, how does cold pressing CBD affect storage and shelf life?
Yeah, so funny enough, it actually works really well. So because we're keeping it in its natural form, our shelf life is actually 2 years. So we don't have any preservatives or additives in our product. So it means, again, it's much more natural. So like in Europe, we're fully EU certified organic. And our goal for later this year would actually be to get our USD organic. So in our products, essentially, it's just 2 ingredients. It's the organic cold press CBD that we make. And then we just use natural salmon oil as our carrier. Yeah. So the salmon oil that we use, we actually get that from Ireland at the moment. And then for the US, we're actually sourcing that from the US.
Wonderful. Wow, what a great combination. I'm a huge fan of the fish oils for omega-3s.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, for palatability, it works really well. So like dogs and cats absolutely love the taste. And again, you're getting your omegas in there. So it's a nice combination between our, I suppose, cold press CBD and the salmon oil.
That 2-year shelf life, how does that compare to other brands typically?
To be honest, it kind of depends, I suppose, brand to brand. Usually most CBD products, you'll get minimum probably 12 months. Some will probably get 18. We done the extended shelf life testing to make sure, I suppose, our CBD was still safe. So 2 years is kind of our upper end. But again, most of our products were actually made pretty much fresh, because the big difference is we manufacture our products. So as we need new batches, we just manufacture them within our pipeline. So most of our CBD products probably wouldn't even see past 6 months because they're already been sold and consumed.
Sure. Are you offering your products primarily direct to consumer? Are there any retail stores that carry Hemp Heroes?
Yeah, so at the moment, in Ireland, we sell in over 100 pet stores, and in the US, we're really trying to tackle that market like currently. So we're looking for independent pet stores and small chains to really stock our products. That's really our goal. Now we're actually having some really cool conversations right now with some kind of medium-sized chains who really like what we're doing, because again, there probably hasn't been any innovation or very little in the CBD space in the US in probably the last 3-4 years. And unfortunately, sometimes when we speak to some of the different pet stores or buyers, when we say we do CBD products, they literally roll their eyes and go, "Oh God, another CBD product." So there's been such a gluttony of products. And again, the quality on a lot of these have been very questionable. So the impression a lot of people have is like, okay, it's another CBD product, which is identical to the last one I seen last week and the week before, where when we explain what we do, how we actually manufacture our products, which makes us one of less than 10 CBD brands out there, probably even less again, and how we cold press means we're one of the 1%. So we've something really unique here to offer, and it brings something new and exciting to the industry. So our goal really is to get more into retail and also do some D2C as well.
Sure. I think our audience is probably more familiar with the uses for CBD. But in your experience, in your customer base, what are some of the most common conditions that people look to CBD for their pets?
Yeah, so it's probably kind of nearly four main, I suppose, categories I'd put it into. So the first one is definitely joint issues. I'd say probably at least 30, if not 40% of our pet parents are using it for that reason. So that can be anything from like hip dysplasia, ligament damage, arthritis, or just kind of mobility issues. So by far, that's probably the biggest reason I think people use CBD for their pets. And the feedback and the results we've seen in that space is absolutely phenomenal. So
And is that generally just older senior dogs or cats even?
yeah, so like both cats and dogs, I would say most of our customers are more probably dog based. But yeah, senior dogs and even younger dogs. So like for example, if you have a dog with hip dysplasia, that can be a 1 to 2 year old dog, even a puppy. So it could be something genetically there that's an issue. And they just have really bad joints. So in that case, it kind of does work across the board. Usually it is more kind of older dogs as they get older, just like humans, their joints wear and tear. So they need kind of a little bit more support. So one of the really interesting things that I suppose we're doing, which is kind of really, I suppose, bringing new research to the industry, is we've been working with Ireland's largest veterinary university, and which is called UCD. So UCD is essentially, I suppose, the gold standard when it comes to veterinary college and education in Ireland. So probably about 90% of vets in Ireland actually train there to qualify as a vet. So we've been working with them for the past probably about 4.5 years. And one of the studies we've actually been working very closely with on them is a pain management study. And that's actually looking at using our cold press CBD for pain management for osteoarthritis in dogs. So we've actually completed the study, and essentially the way it was set up was it was a double-blind control placebo. So I know that's a lot of jargon, but essentially what it means, a double-blind is both the pet owner and the vet are completely blind, so they know what product they're getting. And you have a control in there, which means we had our cold press CBD as, say, product A, and then product B was a control, which in this case was actually hemp seed oil. So hemp seed oil doesn't have any cannabinoids, or if it does, it's a very small trace element. So what would happen in this case, say if it was your dog, you'd come in, they would give you product A or B. You would take the product, use it for 4 weeks, and based on the protocol we gave you. Then after 4 weeks, there would be basically a checkup. The vet would check the dog. You'd give kind of a report on how the dog was moving, his behavior, essentially fill in a form. And we used 2 different pain metrics. So one of them is called the Helsinki Pain Index, and then the other one's called the Liverpool pain method. So 2 really well-known, robust ways of measuring pain. And after the 4 weeks that essentially go through the assessment, you would then have a 4-week washout period where the dog would get absolutely nothing to make sure there's nothing in their system. And then you get 4 weeks on the reverse product. So that way, it meant there was no kind of, I suppose, interaction that if you got the CBD first, if you went straight into the placebo, it might be still in their system. So we ran this with 15 dogs, and across the board, we actually seen a reduction in pain.
Wow.
Yeah. So like it put it this way, it actually went so well that the head of the veterinary university actually has completely changed his mind on CBD, and now they're actually teaching CBD to the students in UCD.
Oh, that's great. That's a
Yeah.
huge step forward for the entire industry, really.
Oh, absolutely. So again, this was a very small scale study. So usually what happens in this case is it's called a power index, where it's a calculation where they can actually determine how many dogs you would need to get a more robust study. So in this case, we're probably looking at doing a second phase. We're probably at least 50 to kind of 80 dogs. And again, that will give us a much better robust figure. But
Sure.
across the board, it worked so well. In some cases, the pet owner actually got the CBD first time around, and because it worked so well, they could notice the decline after stopping the product, and they actually asked to leave the study so they can go back on the product.
Mm,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, so absolutely fascinating. The vets, I think, to be honest, in UCD were so blown away because they weren't expecting much. Where I knew anecdotally, we've heard this hundreds of times from our customers how effective it is. So the plan with that is a paper is going to be published later this year in, I think it's JAVE, it's the American Journal of Veterinary Medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the goal, where we want to get it publicized. And because that study went so well, we actually got a second study, which kind of ties into probably the next big reason people use CBD, and that's around anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Wait, before you move on to these other
Yeah.
reasons, I have so many questions about the study because I did not know you were
Yeah.
going to bring that up in today's live. Just a couple of questions. Has that piqued interest at all from any of the veterinary schools in the US?
Not just yet, no, because to be honest, I don't think it's actually that much public knowledge that people know. So I think once we get the actual paper published, I think there's going to be a lot more interest, because I know certain veterinary colleges, even around the world, have started to do CBD studies. So I know the US have done a few. I know, for example, like Mars Pet Care have done a couple of different studies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I know Liverpool College in the UK, they have quite a big veterinary university which are looking at studies as well. So I'm hoping it will be kind of a cascade effect where more people will actually look at this and take it seriously.
Sure, sure. Well, I do hope that paper is published in time before our summit, because I don't know if you've heard, but we just got the Feed Rail Summit race approved for 10.5 CEs for
Oh,
veterinarians and
amazing.
veterinary staff. So this is just another incentive for vets who are potentially on the conventional side and interested in learning more about holistic and integrative wellness to come and learn more. And this could be a great opportunity for you to share what you're working on in Ireland with them, and perhaps they might be interested in helping a study take place here.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we definitely want to work with more universities, because probably the issue that we had that we couldn't do a larger scale study was just some of it was down to funding. And then also just in terms of the number of dogs, because we had to essentially grade them and make sure they met certain criteria.
Yeah.
Otherwise, obviously they wouldn't be possibly be able to take part in the study, or for different reasons. Maybe it could have been medication they're already on. It could essentially conflict with the, I suppose, end result.
Sure, sure, absolutely. Well, UC Davis is not too far from San Diego, so I would try to fit that into your itinerary. We're going to have Dr. Trina Hazza. I'm not sure if you've met or connected with her before, but she's a veterinary oncologist and
Oh, amazing.
works a lot with CBD. Actually, one of her talk is going to be about CBD as well. I know I'm taking up all the questions for any of you guys that are joined in and watching. If you have any questions for David, please, please, please feel free to drop them in the comments and chime in, especially about your experiences with CBD. Okay, one more question about the study before we move on to anxiety and the other reasons why dogs might benefit from CBD. I was thinking about the food that these dogs were fed during the study. Was there a control? Do you know if any of them were fed, a raw diet or fresh food, or were they fed kibble? Any
Yes.
context?
Yeah, so we actually didn't look at what kind of food they were getting. So it would have been definitely interesting to see if some were getting raw or kibble. But in the case, I suppose, of the study, there was only so many variables we could control. So that actually wasn't something that UCD wanted to look at. I had kind of mentioned it to them, and there was some other things we actually looked at doing. So, for example, we actually wanted to use a force plate analysis. So a force plate it's kind of like a giant measuring scale, but essentially what it does, it measures the force each paw exerts. So,
Mm,
for example, if you have a dog with arthritis and say it's the back legs, in theory, they should put less pressure on their back legs and more on their front. So if with the study we could have used the force plate, essentially we could have hopefully shown a better dispersion of pressure, that if they're technically in less pain, they should be able to apply more force to the bad area.
sure.
So that was something that we wanted to include in the study, but unfortunately UCD actually don't have a force plate. And yeah, I think they've been looking to get one for the last 3 years. I'm not the only one. Um, but they are kind of expensive piece of kit. I think the minimum price you're looking at is probably about 60,000 euro. So it's not exactly like it's a couple of $100. And we did look at trying to get one, but again, to try raise that amount of money for this, it would have been quite difficult.
Sure.
And we looked at alternatives like pressure mats, but again, a lot of them you're talking minimum 30, 40,000. So a lot of the funding had already been allocated. So we said, look, we'll go with the kind of, I suppose, vet assessment, use the Liverpool and the Helsinki pain methods. And that
Hmm.
was a pretty robust study. And then hopefully the goal was, if the study turned out the way it did, we can now apply for further funding. So that's the goal now, to bring it to a larger scale study. And then possibly, depending if we get ethical approval, maybe even use blood markers, say for inflammation, or use ideally some sort of a pressure mat that we can actually measure the exertion of pressure.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, obviously coming from the Feed Real Institute, fresh food is always on my mind. So I'd be
Yeah.
curious if you could perhaps limit, or even just as part of your control, what food, or even additional sort of,
Yeah.
supplements, whether
Questions.
they be whole food supplements and glucosamine
Yeah.
and things like that, that typically might help joints and arthritis. Anyway, we can geek out about that later. All right. So we covered joints, pain, anxiety was the other reason that you say pets commonly look towards CBD for help.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, you're probably talking about 30% of our pet parents use it for anxiety. And because the study went so well with the joints, we actually got a second study looking at anxiety. So that study is actually currently ongoing. And in that study, we kind of took a couple of the learnings from the Mars Pet Care study. So Mars Pet Care, I think back in 2023, done an anxiety study. And essentially in the study, they used a single dose of CBD and then measured cortisol levels and behavior. And from that single dose, they actually seen a reduction in anxiety and cortisol, which is pretty cool from a single dose. So what we done is we kind of took it a step further, and we partnered with the oncology unit in UCD, because in order to get ethical approval and actually make this, I suppose, a bit more of a friendly study, it probably didn't seem right to essentially take blood from healthy dogs just for the study. So what we've done is we've actually partnered with the oncology unit, and these dogs are actually getting their bloods done as part of their treatments.
Hmm.
And again, we've done a double blind control. So what happens is they either get our CBD or hemp seed oil again. They get 3 single doses. Their cortisol essentially will be measured through their blood and their behavior. And it'll be kind of taken in 3 intervals. So it'll be taken before they have anything at basically their base level, then when they get the CBD, and then when they get the control. So we'll have 3 measurements in their cortisol. And hopefully what we should see, if it, I suppose, compares with the Mars study, is that when they get the CBD, there's actually a significant reduction in cortisol levels.
Yeah, that would be ideal.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's ongoing at the moment. I think we'll have about 50 dogs in that study. So it's a much bigger scale study, and that will run for about a year and a half. So we'll finish that one probably mid next year. And anecdotally, we know for anxiety, CBD absolutely works. So, like, again, a huge portion of our customer base use it on a regular basis, whether it's a fireworks season, thunder, even car travel, or just general anxiety. And in Ireland, we have a huge giving back program. So we work with 12 major animal rescues across the country. So under our Giving Back program, they actually get our products for free to use in the shelter. And the vast majority of them are using them for anxiety and joint issues. So like we've seen firsthand how effective it is.
Well, I mean, those shelter, if anyone has visited a shelter, the environment itself is
terrible.
It's difficult. And I'd say, even to add on to that, the rehoming experience, right? And then now you're in a new place, new environment, and sort of settling in. Lots of anxiety related to that. I can see where CBD can be quite helpful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like when I started in 2018 and we'd one pet product, we were actually only working with one rescue in Ireland. And over the last 7 years, we've essentially expanded that out. So now we have 12 major rescues. So for example, like we'd work with the oldest animal rescue in Ireland, which is nearly 200 years old. And we also work with the National Guide Dogs Charity for Ireland. So they're the one who train all of the guide dogs for the blind. So again, if they're using our products and I suppose endorsing them and saying how good they are and getting them for free, we're either paying them a lot of money or the product works. And we definitely don't pay them a lot of money.
No, I mean, there's so much, I would say, corruption going on in much of the human pharmaceutical industry that a lot of people think is replicated when it comes to pets. But a lot of that is not. We can't even afford to make that happen.
No, definitely not.
Oh, that's funny. Well, wonderful. Okay, so joints, pain generally, anxiety, anything to add to that list for people who maybe haven't, considered CBD as an option?
Yeah, so probably the other two would be kind of skin issues. And again, skin issues more comes to inflammation because CBD is a really good natural anti-inflammatory. And then pair that with CBDA, which is actually even a better anti-inflammatory. So we'd have some people who'd use it for skin issues. Now, again, unfortunately, most skin issues are probably food derived, where it's probably an allergy. So if you're feeding your dog chicken and he can't have chicken, CBD is not going to be the miracle cure here. Like you need to look at the root cause. But when it comes to general inflammation, it works really well. So like a smaller portion of our customers definitely are using it for skin. And then probably lastly, which I think is probably one of the most fascinating areas, would be epilepsy. So epilepsy is really, really interesting. And we've had some huge success stories where dogs who have probably 2 to 3 fits a month are on our CBD and they've gone 6-7 months without any seizures whatsoever, or it's reduced the frequency where it could have been 3-4 months. Now it's one every 2-3 months. So again, the results will vary. And there's probably an element there in terms of their diet and everything else, or if they're using, say, tick and flea treatments. I know that can have a massive impact and usually is a trigger for certain issues. But in a lot of cases, we can at least reduce the frequency, which is huge. So definitely seizures is an area that we actually want to explore next. The only issue with seizures from a study perspective is you can kind of only use 2 different, types of dogs. So either ones that are completely drug resistant. So you've tried absolutely everything for seizures, nothing will work. And then in that case, it's kind of a last ditch attempt where you can say, okay, look, nothing else works. You can try CBD. We can't guarantee anything. And then hopefully we can get some results. Or dogs who've never been on any medication, because if they're on medication and taking the CBD, you won't be able to quantify which is doing which.
Right.
Yeah,
that's a tough one to crack, but I mean, the results will speak for themselves if there is efficacy.
Exactly. And like I have seen some studies coming out of the US. I can't remember which college it was, but they done a study on CBD with seizures, and I think they seen a 40% reduction. So there is definitely something there. And even if you bring it to a human level, one of the only medically approved CBD products is for epilepsy in children. So if Big Pharma are putting that much money into an epilepsy product, which is CBD derived, there's definitely a use case there. So I think that's a really interesting area that we want to explore. It's just from a clinical setting, it's a little bit more tricky. Because again, if your dog has seizures and he's on medication, we can't exactly take him off the medication to try CBD.
Right.
So it just makes it a little bit more complex.
Are those studies like the Mars Pet Care one? Do you know if they're using a full spectrum CBD? I would assume so.
No. So interestingly, in the anxiety study, they used a broad spectrum CBD. Yeah. So again, that's why when we looked at it, we said, okay, they're using broad spectrum, which is obviously going to be a much lower quality, where if we're using full spectrum, we should see a much better impact. So another study that we done with UCD, which is completely separate, was actually for cancer. And it was for ovarian cancer cells in cell cultures. So UCD had been doing a study around CBD isolate and seeing how CBD would interact with essentially cancer cells and see if there was any benefit. And when I spoke to them, they actually didn't realize that they were using essentially the lowest quality. So when I explained it to them, I was like, you do know you've basically removed all the other beneficial compounds and you're just using one. And they were like, okay, right. We thought this was the purest version. I was like, technically it is, but it's the most processed. Sure. So what I said to them was, look, you should actually look at CBDA. It's a really interesting compound. It's essentially the precursor to CBD, and it shows a lot of, I suppose, a lot of research has shown it as a better absorption, better anti-inflammatory properties. So I actually sourced them a CBDA isolate from the US, and they used it on the cell cultures. And in this case, it actually worked better than the CBD. Yeah. So what we done then, and essentially to prove the entourage effect, was we gave them our cold press full spectrum CBD, and then they compared that against the other two, and using the full spectrum, it massively outperformed the other two isolates. So in theory, we actually proved the entourage effect. And the way that they done it was, it's based on, it's basically the number of cancer cell deaths that occur from applying essentially the mixture on there. So I think it was 30% of the quantity was needed of our full spectrum CBD in comparison to the isolates, which means it's nearly three point whatever, times more effective. So in theory, we actually show it having a full, I suppose, holistic compound rather than individual isolates have a much better impact. So that study is still ongoing at the moment. And again, we're hoping to actually have a paper because we part funded that study. So we're kind of one of the donor, I suppose, donors for that study.
Wow. That's going to be awesome when they expand that study and are actually using full spectrum instead of CBD isolate.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, a lot of the studies that have been done so far with CBD have been either CBD isolate or broad spectrum. Very few have been done with I suppose, full spectrum CBD.
Yeah.
So, I think we're kind of really, I suppose, trying to bring it to a new level and actually show how effective full spectrum CBD is and why people should be using it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and as if that wasn't enough with your full spectrum CBD that's cold pressed and organic and B certified, you guys also do functional mushrooms?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I suppose we've been manufacturing food supplements for nearly, I suppose, 7 years. So we've quite a lot of knowledge built up there around manufacturing, whether it's human products or pet products. And I can very quickly look at a product and see if it's basically full of crap or if it's good. So what actually happened in terms of the mushrooms and how it came about, actually July of 2023, my mum got diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. So she's doing absolutely brilliant now and she's fully recovered. But when she got the diagnosis, obviously it was a huge shock to the family. But instantly I kind of went into, okay, right, we're going to throw everything in the kitchen sink at this and make sure she beats it. So when I was looking at things to complement her treatment, like she went through radiation, chemotherapy, and surgery. And when I was looking at things I could do to help, essentially mushrooms came up so many times. And in particular for breast cancer, it was actually turkey tail. Mm-hmm. So turkey tail is quite well known as a really good anti-cancerous properties. And one of the things I actually came across quite early on in my research was the video from Paul Stammel, who a lot of people would know as one of the leading mushroom experts. And his own mum actually had stage, I think, 3 or 4 breast cancer. And she was in her 80s at the time. And essentially the doctor said, look, no point of doing chemotherapy. You just wouldn't be able to handle it. But there is this really cool research project being done in Stanford with turkey tail mushrooms. It might be a long shot, but it could be interesting. And she actually said, look, that's actually my son who's doing the study. So she, coincidence. So she actually started on turkey tail mushrooms, and you'll find this documentary. There's actually a snippet of it on Netflix around around mushrooms in general. But in this case, his mom actually was fully cancer free, I think within about 6 months.
Wow.
Which is incredible. Now, I think she did also do possibly radiation, but again, turkey tail was one of the key things that she used. So
Mhm.
after hearing that and some of the research I looked into, I instantly was like, okay, I'm definitely getting turkey tail from my mum. But when I went actually to look for products in the market, 99% of the products I found were literally just raw mushroom powders. And you see, when I actually done a deeper dive into mushrooms, raw mushroom powders are essentially the bottom of the barrel and the cheapest products. So I'll kind of explain why that is. And most people would think if you're getting a mushroom powder, clearly it must be good. And like that's exactly what you're looking for. But you see, mushrooms have a really thick cell wall called chitin. And essentially, this is like a hard fiber. So traditionally, a lot of these mushrooms come from Chinese medicine. And all of these mushrooms actually would have been consumed as a tea. So you would have had essentially hot water, which would have broke down the mushroom, broke down the chitin, helped you actually get the beneficial compounds, which are like your beta glucans, your polysaccharides, your terpenes, and essentially the rare minerals in the mushrooms. So if you're just taking a mushroom powder, effectively what they've done is taken, say, your turkey tail, your lion's mane mushroom, they've put it into a dehydrator, so sucked all the water out, and then they just powderize it.
Mm.
So your product is going to be really high in chitin. So essentially, it's very high in fiber, which I suppose is good for your gut, but also it's not what you're looking for. And it's going to be very low in the compounds that you're looking for. So you're not going to absorb them the same level. So when I actually got turkey tail initially from my mom, I actually got her a raw turkey tail powder, which I didn't actually realize at the time. And I thought I was doing the best thing for her. But in fact, it would have had very low levels of the compounds that we were looking for. So when I learned a little bit more, I realized, okay, we actually need something that's been dual extracted. So kind of similar to CBD, obviously an extract is much more potent. And usually the best way is through water and alcohol extraction, because some of the compounds in the mushroom will be water soluble where others aren't. And that's where the alcohol helps break it down and lock them even further.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've done over the last pretty much year is actually develop a full range of functional mushroom tinctures and for all humans and pets.
Wow. And all of that is also done in the same facility as the CBD?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the same facility in Ireland and the same facility in the US. So our CBD and mushroom products in the US are actually made in the US, which is really unique. And they're all made in Westfield, New York. So that's actually where we manufacture our products. So
are there studies that speak to the efficacy of the tincture versus the mushroom powder?
So in general, you see, this is where kind of people get confused. So a mushroom powder hasn't done any extraction, where you could actually have an extract powder, which is still in powder form, but it's been extracted properly. So
okay. So how does
yeah,
one know the difference?
well, this is the thing, and like I can kind of explain it to you here. But for example, if you just go onto Amazon or go online and Google lion's mane powder 1 kilo, you'll probably pick one up for under $100. So you'll buy a kilo of lion's mane powder. It hasn't been extracted. It's going to be very low in your actives. And again, what some brands will do is they'll essentially take 30 grams of that powder, put it in a little tin, and they sell it to the end customer for $50. So effectively, they've made the product for probably about $3. They sell it to you for 50, and then your dog has it, and you'll basically see no effect. So the difference with ours is we're using extracts, so they've been dual extracted to really break down the mushroom, unlock them compounds. And then what we've done is we've decided to go the tincture route, because naturally liquids have a much better absorption than powders and capsules. So with our tinctures, what we've done is actually pair them with natural botanicals as well. So for example, like our lion's mane is a 50-1 extract. So what that means is 15 kilos makes 1 kilo of extract. So it's super potent. And then we've paired that with ashwagandha and ginseng, which means, again, you're getting extra benefit there and really good functionality. So in general, I think capsules are between 30 and 50% absorption rate. Powders are between about 50 and 70%. And then liquids are between 80 and 98%. So I know there's quite a range of degrees there, but in general, naturally, a powder and a capsule are going to have far less absorption than liquid. So that was one of the reasons why we actually went towards the liquid tinctures, because one, they're easier to use, and two, it's much better effect.
Right. No, that makes sense. I think, just like the CBD space, the mushroom space, at least within pet, is also starting to get a bit saturated.
Yeah.
But this is all really helpful for pet parents and what to look for. I think I would love to have you back on to talk a little bit more about the mushroom powders and the extracts and all of that, and I'll do a deep dive like we did with your cold
Yeah.
pressed CBD, because I think a lot of people will benefit from having that knowledge and be able to ask the right questions when they're sort of sifting through all of these brands.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like, again, it is an issue because like I was only looking at some products there only the other day. And what some brands have done is not only are they just using the raw powder, which is really, really cheap to manufacture and essentially will give the end user very little results. But what they're actually doing is mixing it in with the mycelium, which is essentially think of it as like the roots of the mushroom, and also the substrate, which is basically the material it's grown on.
Right.
So in some cases, they'll actually grow the mushrooms on grain or oats. And naturally, the mushroom is obviously going to take the nutrients from whatever it's grown on. So if you're using grain and oats, it's probably going to be low nutrients to begin with. And then if you're mixing all that in together, what ends up happening is you get a product with very little fruiting body, which is essentially where most of the benefits are. You have the roots, which have some benefits. And then you have essentially this oats or grain, which is just oats and grain and essentially a filler. So only the other day I seen a product which is being sold in the US, and I think it was 100 or 200 grams of lion's mane powder. So on the back it says lion's mane powder, which means it's not an extract, so it hasn't been extracted whatsoever. And then it says other ingredients, myceliated oats. Means chances are out of that 100 grams, you'd be even lucky probably to get 20 grams of probably lion's mane in there in terms of the fruiting body. It hasn't been extracted, and you're getting basically a bag of oats or grain.
Right. Which, coming from the fresh food perspective, is something that we ought to avoid at all costs anyway. Yeah.
So a very cheap and effective product. And unfortunately, it's where the customer isn't educated enough. And if they buy that, have a bad experience, the likelihood of them trying functional mushrooms again is probably quite small. And then it's really our job to try to explain to them, look, unfortunately, you paid $20, $30 for something that was essentially either fiber or oats, and it had very little impact because it's such a low quality. So I think as customers get more educated, I think they will start asking the right questions, and it will get a lot easier. And then hopefully brands like this won't be able to get away with it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all of your knowledge with us. We are very much looking forward to meeting you in person at this year's Feed Real Summit. For those of you that haven't gotten your tickets yet, we still have a few left, and I think just 5 VIP tickets remaining. So make sure that you get onto that. Thank you, David, so much for joining us today. Where can everybody find you and your products?
Yeah, so you can find us on hempheroes.com. So we spell our name a little bit differently. So it's HEMPHEROS. So you'll find all of our products up there. And we will actually have a US site live very soon. And on our mushroom website's actually going live at the end of this month. And that's called Mush & Co. So it's MUSSH and then CO. So you can find us on there. We've WhatsApp, we've Instagram, we've the whole lot. So if there's any questions people have, one of the team will get in touch, or I'll get in touch. And yeah, happy to kind of, I suppose, answer any questions people have and hopefully help.
Yeah, absolutely. You also were very generous to offer 20% off our new customers' first purchase, and ask that people send over an email to, is it Dan at hempheroes.com or David?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. We'll include that for sure in the comments, but thank you for offering that to all of our viewers. Very much looking forward to having you at the summit this October. Make sure you add UC Davis on your itinerary for when you're here, and if there's anyone that I can put you in contact with, please don't hesitate to ask.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because we're hoping the study will be kind of finalized now and reviewed for publish soon. So fingers crossed it actually could be published before we're over, which would be amazing. And if not, we hopefully should be able to get even an excerpt from it that we can share, I suppose, with the people at the Feed Real Summit.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Great. Well, thanks again for joining us. Thank you all for tuning in, and I hope you all have a good afternoon and evening.